You're listening to There Ought to Be a Law, the Center for Auto Safety podcast with Executive Director Michael Brooks, Chief Engineer Fred Perkins, and hosted by me, Anthony Cimino. For over 50 years, the Center for Auto Safety has worked to make cars safer. Hey, welcome to the Center for Auto Safety podcast, the only podcast tracking that it's been over 3,000 days since full self-driving has been shown to be better than a human, at least according to Elon Musk. Today we have with us a guest. We have Mike Nelson of QuantivRisk. Mike Nelson is the chairman and founder of QuantivRisk, a risk management and technology company. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Hey, thanks for having me, Gus.
Absolutely. So can you tell us a little bit more about QuantivRisk?
Sure. So QuantivRisk is a company that takes data from vehicles and uses the data and the video to basically evaluate what happened in an accident in an objective way. Our position on a lot of this is somewhat agnostic as to who did what. It's more or less just a transparent way reporting. Here's what the data shows. Here's what the video matched with the data shows. To our thinking, as we get further and further down this autonomous or automated vehicle, we always make the distinction between the two of those. As we get further and further along that pathway, we believe it's going to be important to focus on all the cars and be the Rosetta Stone of what that data looks like, because it's going to look different depending on what car or model or software update. And, real time, you're going to need to know what was going on in the platform that was being driven, and probably more than one car at a time. So we're well past our proof of concept stage, and we now have people on both the insurance side, the plaintiff attorney side, coming to us and saying, can you tell us in an objective way what happened? And we think transparency is incredibly important here. I noticed in some of your materials you cite to the NTSB position on this, on how important it is to have that objective view of what happened after an accident. And so that's what we've been working on, is building out that platform. And we have a tool that takes very Rosetta Stone-like, and we have a tool that takes data from different sources and gives a generalized view of what happened to folks that don't really want to get that deep into the data. And then when you sync that, when video is available to the video, it's a really powerful tool. So anyway, that's the QuantivRisk is building out that platform, and we expect to be the data aggregator for everyone to refer to, and really change the way risks are managed as we look at the future of automotive technology.
So how did this come about? How did you start? Because I mean, we see this with every car in the last, 10 plus years has a ton of sensors on it. It's collecting a lot of data. And we know from a consumer point of view, they're like, hey, can I see my data? I was in an accident. I can't get this. So how did you guys start this, and how are you actually getting access to the data?
Yeah, so I'll handle the first part of that question. I'll get to the second part. So the first part, in 2019, a gentleman driving on the Long Island Expressway, which is the world's largest parking lot. He's in rush hour, about 4:30 in the afternoon on a Friday, and he's in bumper-to-bumper traffic, and he's in a Tesla, and he's in traffic-aware cruise control. Even back then, it was touted as making bumper-to-bumper traffic less painful and the right way to deal with this stuff. What happened in the accident, I'll get to in a minute, but what the gentleman driving a Model X reported was, I don't know what happened, my car went crazy. And it's easy to understand once you get the data in the video as to what did happen. but you can also understand why he thought his car went crazy. So when I received the data and the video, and there was some arm wrestling with Tesla back then where I had to sue them first to get it, uh, uh, was eye-opening. And I thought, and this goes back to the days when I was a claims adjuster for an insurance company, but also a lawyer. Um, this is going to completely change how people evaluate accidents. Police reports are irrelevant. They're terrible evidence anyway. They're not even evidence. It's mostly built on hearsay. And police departments don't understand the tech in these cars. They don't know how to evaluate them still. We're talking several years since what I'm talking about. And so, I contacted, after several tries of getting through to Tesla, I finally got to the right person. And he said, well, sorry, we only give this data to people that have badges or subpoenas. And I said, well, I can fix the subpoena thing. So anyway, so issue a subpoena, pre-litigation subpoena. And I got the data, and we already had some video from the dash cam, but we also got some still images from the car. And this accident is kind of interesting. And I know it's a radio broadcast only, so I'll try to describe it. This gentleman's in the extreme right-hand lane, and he's doing about 3 miles an hour.
Right.
And somebody comes in off an on-ramp, and it's an Audi, and it starts to merge in front of his Tesla. And the Tesla does not pick up the merging vehicle. It's following the tractor trailer that's in front of it. And as the tractor trailer starts to move out, he can see the Audi, but his car doesn't process there's a new object in my lane. So his car, moving at 3 miles an hour, just plows into the vehicle he can see, and he assumes the car's going to stop for him.
Oh.
So in this part of the world, that's called a cut-in. And back then, Teslas were terrible at this stuff. Again, we'll get into how that kind of technology has been marketed over time. But the cut-in, you can imagine this human being trying to process, what is my car doing? I don't understand this because I can see this. But he has to almost immediately process, what is my car doing, which is different than how am I driving? He's trying to account for both of those. And then you have to put in the human factors part of this, is how long does it take for a human being to respond to this? And so it's debatable whether or not he stepped on the accelerator, but it appears that he did from the data. And so instead of stopping, he compounds the problem by driving very fast. He managed to avoid the Audi, but then he went into 2 adjacent lanes and wiped out a few other cars, and total lost his car. So that's sort of the beginning of QuantivRisk, because we started to realize with the data and the video, we're going to get to the point I made earlier, we can understand accidents that nobody else is going to be able to understand. And then, around that time, there was some really noteworthy accidents, like the Mountain View crash out in California. I started talking to the NTSB folks and DOT folks, and started to realize, God, nobody else is even on this. So we created a company on the heels of that. I had to leave the law firm I was associated with, because they would have wanted part of the company if I was building it while I was still there. So, and that all happened about a month before the pandemic hit. So it was an unusual time to start a company. But I'll hit the pause button there. I don't know if there's more questions about it. There was another part to your question, and I forget the second part of it.
Yeah.
But,
so my next part is, okay, so you get hired by who hired you in this case? Was it the driver of the vehicle, the insurance company?
both.
Okay.
The insurance company, but also the driver.
Okay. So they want to find out what happened, but the thing we're always curious about, and I think it was the Wall Street Journal in the last month, they hired hackers to basically reverse engineer Tesla's hardware and software so they could see, hey, this is how we can have access to the data and we can figure out what's going on. So how did you get access to the data? I mean, are you getting that when you said dash cam footage? Are you getting this from police, or are you getting this from the Tesla itself?
Well, in that instance, it was off a dash cam initially.
From the
Uh,
Tesla.
yeah,
Okay.
but then as part of that, we eventually did bring a lawsuit against Tesla, and I can't get into what was shared during discovery. There's
Okay.
confidentiality in place, but I can share very generally because this has been Tesla's position all along. Uh, the the instance an event happens in a Tesla, all the data in the vehicle gets beamed up to a cloud. So, the struggle everybody sees is how to get this out of the car, which is some of what the Wall Street Journal was doing. The easier route is now, and I do think I played a role in this, is the consumer can access a portal at a Tesla cloud that they have as part of being a customer. And believe it or not, within um, 30 minutes, the data you want, even if it's not accident related, is yours. They will deliver that to you. Now they're very, limited in what they will give. They call it only the consumer data as opposed to proprietary data. Um, and it's just scratching the surface of what data they're collecting. As part of the work we've done, we understand much better now the scope of the data, and that's sort of what the Wall Street Journal was getting into. But if you want to look at an earlier version of what we were working on, the New York Times did an article related to a different accident, but on the same concept of what we're doing. And they show some of we gave them some video related to that other accident, but then they sort of reimagine exactly what we're doing.
Hmm.
And so I think that article goes back to 2021. So
Okay. And so what you were talking about with the Rosetta Stone for these different OEMs, because I have a Toyota, Michael has a Volkswagen, Fred's got a Subaru. I believe you have a Tesla, right?
I
And
have a Tesla Rivian.
yeah, so they all store data in their own formats. I'm sure the video formats, we can find some standards, but what other telemetrics data they're storing? How are these guys storing it? Because there's no standard format saying, "Hey, this is all in XML," or "Hey, we encrypted it," or "We did some weird hash on it." Like how is that done?
Yeah, our primary focus has been on Tesla because it was further ahead than everybody else. And once we figured out how to access the data and the video, and by the way, now where that accident I was talking about in 2019, now as a consumer, you not only get your data, but you also get your video of the accident as well from the cloud. So, but getting back to different car manufacturers, yeah, it's all different. And some of it is beamed to a cloud, a lot more than anybody's being honest about. Fred and I were at the TRB meeting, Transportation Research Board meeting, where inexplicably some of the car manufacturers are getting up and talking about all the latest and greatest tech, and they were all talking about a lot of their data is being sent, from the car to a cloud. So there's a very inconsistent approach by car manufacturers to how much is happening that way, where it's being transmitted. But it has to be transmitted because these cars are all using that data to tune the artificial intelligence aspect of the driving environment. And so we know the data is going there.
Right.
But I think they're struggling, some of the other car manufacturers beside Tesla, because they're working in many ways about old platforms, not new platforms. They're struggling with how to get that data up to a cloud for their purposes, not for the purposes I'm talking about.
Right. And they're still making the claim that this is our data, the OEM. You bought the car, you gave us all the money, but we own the data.
So getting back to Tesla, so I sued them a number of times to get data, and then I think this agreement's now stale, but it was, we'll give you the data, Mike, just don't sue us anymore. But you can't tell anybody you're getting it from us. Like, okay, fine. So then the California Consumer Privacy Act comes along, and the person I'm dealing with at Tesla said, "We're no fools. We're going to give it to California residents. You're going to walk into a court in Florida, And you're going to say, is that fair that you give California residents this data and not a resident of Florida? And he said, so we've decided as a corporation that we're going to make it available to all consumers through this portal. So I'm not sure where I am as far as answering questions, but the car manufacturers haven't gotten to that spot.
Right.
That right now. But the same rules are going to apply, or do apply to them. And I don't want to share with you too much about ongoing conversations with other car manufacturers, but it's a push-pull kind of thing we're going through right now with them.
Right. So I'm without getting into details. In your general sense, are they more kind of like, okay, we see this is the future, we'll figure out how to give it to you, or are they more like, nope, not going to happen?
I think it depends on who you're talking to inside those organizations and which organization it is, how enlightened that person is about forward-looking issues. But another car manufacturer the other day, I had to do the same thing. Was get a court involved, and they were like, "No more, don't do that." And we can see where this is heading. And when we do see the business need, and we do see this as customer friendly, so yeah, they should probably want to understand the data. Part of what I envision, and our organization does, is the better people understand how an accident happened, the more confidence they'll have in the technology. So there should be a motivation by car manufacturers to make this data available without being forced to by the law. Now, I don't think there's so many people inside that organization, or those organizations are going to say, if I give you the data, you're going to sue me. Well, frankly, I think that's not a very enlightened position to take. But as I told you before we started, I can talk a lot on this stuff. So feel free to put a pause button up, and I'll stop.
No,
I got a question for you, Mike. A lot of the AV manufacturers are touting the safety of their vehicles.
Yeah.
And yet none of them seem to have a quantifiable or objective basis for their claims of safety. What do you think about that? Is there any reason for them to say that my car is safer than X, or my car is safe enough because of Y, or how does that work?
Well, first, I treat differently autonomous vehicles, which are largely in development, versus ADAS vehicles, which are a bit more mainstream. But even ADAS, which is not as drastic as automated vehicles, and probably maybe for the benefit of the audience, think of AV as a full robot that's going to do most, if not all, of the driving experience, versus ADAS, which has been slowly creeping into the current car fleets and handles lane keeping assist and adaptive cruise control and parking. So the latter being, I'll call ADAS, which is more and more making its way into the fleet. The part of this that's a struggle is they're both saying these cars are safer. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety just did a whole evaluation of ADAS related vehicles, which is not as steep a climb as AVs. And only one car, a Lexus, was found to have an adequate ADAS system. Now, it also depends on what automation we're talking about. So if we're talking about automatic emergency braking, yeah, that does make cars safer. And the data is starting to flow that those type of devices or that type of technology will bring a car to a stop. And I think a lot of people are starting to realize this when they're texting when they shouldn't be, or they're not paying attention, and all of a sudden the car's slamming on the brakes. And we've seen some commercials on that. So to that extent, it's safer. Backup cameras that also will brake if there's an object back there. I can tell you the data on that is very strong, that's increased a lot of the backing safety issues. But as far as lane keeping assist and adaptive cruise control, I do not believe those cars are safer. And then you have to put the human factor in touch and on top of that. And so the folks at MIT, for instance, and Brian Reamer's group, if you know them, they've done a lot of studies about how lax people are over time. So picture you're a driver of a car with some of this automation on a highway. Over time, it's not even just in that driving event, which might be 2 hours, but over weeks and months of doing it, you tend to get lulled into a complacency about being vigilant as you're driving the car. And that gets into a host of other issues and product liability issues, which I'm happy to talk about. But you basically tend to trust the technology too much. And that's a risk in and of itself.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. One of the issues that we follow, though, is that ADAS is kind of a squishy concept, and it's self-defined by the manufacturers. And you look at a company like Tesla, which in fact has fully autonomous driving, but it stinks and it's dangerous. And they just say, well, it's level 2, and the owner or the driver is responsible. It's really not level 3, but functionally, it's got the same responsibility for the driver as any other kind of automated vehicle. The drivers fall asleep, the car drives itself. There's a real definitional problem here, I think.
Well, let's be clear. Tesla's lawyers define it as level 2. Their marketing defines it as level 5. So,
Well,
Yeah.
right, but
with the steering wheel, level 4.
on their website, they say that the driver has to have complete capability to instantly take over, which of course is impossible. But in my opinion, that whole scenario increases the cognitive load for the driver, because you've not only got to be attentive to all of the operational aspects of the car, but you've also got to be attentive to the state of health of the computer that's driving your vehicle. So I don't see the safety advantage, but narrowly, isn't this a problem that, we need to have some authoritative definition of what the driving level is and what the consequences of that are? Just saying that, it's an SAE level X, Y, or Z is insufficient for consumer purposes.
I agree with you, Fred. I'm on the Society of Automotive Engineer committee for EDR devices. And this is something they even struggle with, because they take the position that EDR data should be a tool that evaluates level 2, but level 3 is coming. And so with level 3, they're creating new standards for what's called data loggers, which will have much more information in there. But this line between 2 and 3 is so fuzzy. And Mercedes has supposedly introduced a level 3, and it's only being used in a couple states. I'm not sure that's even a true level 3, because it's ring fenced, and there's only certain areas you can use it, and it has to be used under certain miles per hour. So, but getting also to this point that Fred just raised, I think is really important. And this actually is how Fred and I met. We were at a different conference called the Society of Automotive Engineers Government and Industry Conference that happens in every January. And there were 3 people up on a dais, and they were talking about a lot of these things. And time after time, you hear these panels say almost the same thing. And some of it is, well, manufacturers do tell you have to stay alert, and they disclaim it in their materials. So problem for you, not for them. And then the second point that was made and caused me to react was somebody from the audience asked a question and said, well, how are we going to adjudicate these problems? And the response back was, well, that's going to be really hard to develop this legal system, and it's going to take a long time. And like, I'm at sort of the front of this crowd, and like, I busted a move. I'm running around like 1,000 people, and I grabbed the microphone. They're like, we don't have any more time for your questions. Like, we're helping sponsor this event. Give me the friggin' microphone. And so I said, this is not a question. This is wrong to say manufacturers can disclaim responsibility in manuals or their driver customer material. So that's crap. And then I don't know if I used the word crap. I may have. But then I said, and this whole idea of it's going to take a long time to get these legal systems in place. I agree with that, but I've been hearing this now for 10 years. We better get busy. This has to be done now. We got to start working on it now. And so I sat down in my chair, wondering if I overstepped my bounds. And all of a sudden, there was this guy named Fred poking at my shoulder saying, "Was that you that just got up and said that?" And so that's how Fred and I met. But those are my positions on some of the things we're talking about. Those disclaimers and material and these manuals are wrong. Ultimately, if you get into a court system, I don't think they're going to matter because product liability doesn't allow for that kind of nonsense. But it's what everybody says, and the car manufacturer is definitely saying it. Well, we told you this is your problem if it doesn't work. And I'll give an extreme example of this, and I'll stop after that to let you guys talk.
So you see, Michael, I'm an excellent judge of character. I don't care what Anthony says.
So if you're using, and again, I don't want to make this all about Tesla, but they're just the best example of some of this. Tesla has this summon feature where you can use your phone to pull your car out of a parking space. Well, I've seen numerous accidents where the Tesla pulling out, not backing out, will just, instead of making an appropriate exit out of the parking space, cuts the corner too short, hitting objects or other cars. They're near misses of human kind of injuries. And then when you go to Tesla and say, this is yours, this is a car mistake. Like, no, that driver is supposed to be using the phone to stop the car. There's no way that you can simply pull your finger off the button in time to see the car is not managing the exit from the parking space. That's how silly it is. Well, we do. You have to be ready. No, that's not the way the law is going to work, and that's not even fair.
Right.
So.
Well, the research we've seen shows that it takes anywhere from 10 to 30 seconds for a driver to take over control of the vehicle. And that's when they're, fully engaged. They're in the driver's seat. They know they have to take over, but they may be, playing cards with the person next to them or who knows what. So there's a big range. But in any case, 10 seconds in a car is an awfully long time. A lot can happen within that. We're going to expand this discussion to our friends at Uber and Cruise once we get to the section on gaslight illumination. So stand by for that. I'm sure you'll have some comments. Yeah,
the human factor piece, there was a study done by the Department of Transportation along with some private sector companies, and it was 2015. And the way I read the study, again, I'm not an engineer, Fred, you could probably do a better job of digesting this, but what I was reading is, on balance, it was 7.2 seconds to execute a takeover response. 7 seconds in an accident scenario, you might as well have it be 7 hours. It's over in 7 seconds. So it takes less than 2 seconds, but not much, just to even realize you're in a problem setting. That's not giving time to come up with what is going wrong, and then come up with a plan, and then to execute on that plan to get out of a problem. So you can easily see 7+ seconds to avoid a disaster. And that's not enough time.
But not being a lawyer, I don't understand this discussion around that the law has to catch up with this, because there's already product liability laws. There's already traffic laws. All these laws exist. We're just saying, okay, it's not Bob behind the steering wheel. It's the Waymo driver, which is just some software and hardware behind the wheel. Is the law having to catch up, figuring out who do we give the ticket to? Because I recommend the executive staff. Or is it where's the law missing? I don't understand.
Well, I'll give you a very simple example of how I think the law is lagging behind. Besides the regulatory standards that haven't been built on any of this stuff, there's very few that are apropos for this technology. Like the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard don't address any of this stuff. But I was involved in a case where this woman was driving in a Tesla. She was in full self-drive, and the car will make a lane change without the human being actually making the lane change. The car will do it itself. So she's being aggressively followed by a car that thinks she's going too slow. And she starts to move into the right lane again by the vehicle, not her. The vehicle gets spooked by a tow truck that's hiding under an underpass. So the car moves back into the left lane. It's only 2 lanes, and slows from 77 to 55. That's dramatic to a guy that's really coming down the backside of that car. So there's a rear-ending accident. That would be 100% liability on that car. That would be negligence. There's an argument as to whether or not somebody slamming on their brakes, but she didn't, could be held responsible for the accident. But now the car arguably misbehaved when it slowed down so dramatically. And it didn't have to. So now, how do you litigate against, in the common way we think of accidents, between negligence with that other vehicle and then shifting some of that risk over to the manufacturer? And even just, I've noticed in some of your materials how much you guys are object to the arbitration requirement some manufacturers operate under. So in that scenario, this person unwittingly had not unchecked the box when they purchased the car. So they were arguably subject to the arbitration requirement. If you have a dispute with Tesla, you have to go to AAA arbitration for that. And then how do you put into this other side of it? It has to be litigated in state court. So I think this blended system of legal risks and getting a better sense of how to move product liability and negligence concepts together is where the law has not developed. And yes, we can look to what's been done in the past, because surely there have been negligence and product liability lawsuits in the past, but we're talking about many, many accidents now. And you won't find any jury charges about automation and human factors that really are meaningful from the state. We don't have a judicial system that's issued any holdings on this stuff. We don't have a judicial system that's even dealt with who owns the data. So, and ownership of data is not even the right way to look at it, but we can talk about that later on if you want.
Okay. That's now I have a better understanding of what's missing there. I just still think we can give tickets to the executives every day.
Yeah.
I'll ask a quick question here. This is what's going on now, but and now even Tesla has some capabilities. Some of the decision making that their cars are using is based in artificial intelligence. And how much harder does it become when you have to show that an artificial intelligence's decisions were negligent? Is that something you can even do? Can you go back into the code, or can you go back into the data and even point to a moment where an artificial intelligence failed, or does that bring up a whole other problem in proof and evidence?
Yeah, so I'll reference a different accident we worked on. This gentleman's driving in a Model Y. He's in the extreme left lane, and he's doing about 75 on a highway. A tractor trailer moves from the extreme right-hand lane to the center lane, not his lane. And the Tesla gets spooked by that moving tractor trailer and aborts the full self-driving by moving him into the median.
Oh my God.
Median. And fortunately, there's a safety cable system that stops his car but totals it out. So the other guys in my company aren't lawyers. And they're like, well, how do you know that the car caused this? Well, I can see the data. We can see the data that the car reacted to the truck. Well, what caused the car to decide to move into the grass? I don't know, but that's not right.
Mm-hmm.
But I can tell you to a certainty that Tesla is getting this information all the time about events, and they're figuring out what happened in the car and what the car was doing, and not just what the human being's doing, because they have to fix these what's called edge cases. So.
Right. So Tesla clearly has some internal system where they can interpret this data and it gets fed and they get to see, okay, this is what happened. This is what occurred. So they have a clear understanding of what happened. Is there a case where you can basically say, hey, we need that system. You guys essentially have the rule book. This data is essentially useless without this rule book.
Yeah. So there is, again, that's part of the law.
Okay.
That's developed. And it's also part of the science of unwrapping this stuff. The Banner case in Florida is a really important case.
Well, I'm sorry, what's the Banner case?
So the Banner case is almost identical cases. There's two cases in Florida where a Tesla goes under a tractor trailer and decapitates the driver. And so the second one was Banner, and that's been an active litigation for a couple of years. And in that case, they got a lot of discovery. But what hampers other people from understanding what's going on is Tesla's always going to get a protective order in these cases. And so we can talk more about Banner later on if you want, but there's a limited ability to see what's being discovered in these cases. And I think that's wrong. And, again, I'm talking about transparency.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think confidence in these systems will be higher if people and car manufacturers can be on the same page about what took place. Human beings don't know. Now, that guy, the person who was involved in the accident died, so it's almost unknowable what he was thinking. And there's some evidence that he was playing a video game or watching a movie or something like that. So he wasn't paying attention anyway. But why did the car not see the truck? People back at Tesla understand that.
Right.
Do we as a society understand that? Not really.
Mike, I'm going to take a small issue with one thing you said. You said that once an edge case is identified, Tesla's got to fix it. I don't think they do, because in particular, if you look at Banner, right, 2 years later, essentially exactly the same thing happened in New Jersey with exactly the same consequences. The driver there was once again decapitated in the collision. So I don't think that there's any evidence that Tesla's looking at these things and saying, well, this is egregious, we need to fix this. I wonder if Tesla's got an economic decision going on to say, well, do we really need to bother to fix this because it doesn't happen a whole lot? Have you got any insights into that, into their decision process?
Yeah, I do. There was an article published a couple months ago, and I forget who published it, Fred. And I'm not advocating that they, whether or not they should or could or whatever, but they do pay attention to events. And so and this is for their own benefit. It's not so much that they're trying to eliminate risk, but they're trying to generate a car that can think. And so they were downloading lots of data from all the cars and all the miles. And then somebody back in headquarters said, why are we paying attention to that? Let's just look at our best drivers and see when they run into trouble. And then we'll digest what went wrong when they got into trouble, usually when they disconnect from autopilot, or it could be an accident. And then they are figuring out based on that, because it's now a much smaller sample size. So they do, by all reporting, take those kind of events seriously and arguably are making in their mind, a safer car, or a car that handles these situations better. But I'm leaving plenty of room for them to say, nah, it's not worth it. We're not going to do that.
Yeah, well, we know from Anthony's reporting earlier that they pay a lot of attention to the roads that the CEO happens to be driving on.
Oh,
and
right.
the consequences. Yeah, right.
That wasn't my reporting. That was, I believe, Ars Technica or the Washington Post or Wall Street Journal. I just read things and spit them out, and I claim they're mine. I'm like ChatGPT. Okay, look, I'm just taking somebody else's work, saying, "Hey, it's mine." Fred believes it. It works out great. Hey, listener, have you gone to autosafety.org and clicked on donate? You have? Ah, you're wonderful. Uh, so what we were talking about before is okay. So a lot of this stuff is hidden through discovery, but that's kind of standard in the history of tort law. It none of this stuff comes out until somebody doesn't settle a case and they actually go to trial, and then in trial it becomes public. Have any of these gone to trial and become public, or does Tesla manage to be like, this is public, but let's keep this on the DL?
Tesla's tried a few of these cases and surprisingly have won some of them. But I think when they see they're vulnerable, this Florida case is going to be important because the trial court is allowing punitive damages based on the representations made by Tesla. And the judge found that a trier of fact could determine that Tesla is exposed to punitive damages, which means the jury's going to get that question. That's appealable. The judge allowing punitive damages in Florida is appealable immediately. So that's now bouncing its way through the Florida appellate courts. But I can tell you that you're going to be able to sell popcorn at the trial. It does go forward, and I'll probably be eating some popcorn because I just want to be able to process without the veil, the shroud of secrecy behind how this goes. But I suspect if punitive damages are allowed, I imagine Tesla's going to settle that case because it's all not just about a car. There's a lot of what happened in the senior levels of management to allow this to fester.
Right. No, they'll just claim it was one lone rogue engineer. I think Volkswagen tried that with Dieselgate. So both
Hey,
you and
Anthony, I
Fred,
don't know.
yeah.
Sorry, I don't know if we have enough time for the whole gaslight illumination, but I've got one point that I want to put in here because it's very much on point. If we can do that. So there's a blog post that says Uber and Cruise to deploy autonomous vehicles on the Uber platform. It's published August 22nd. And the announcement said that Cruise is on a mission to leverage driverless technology to create safer streets and redefine urban life, says Mark Whitten, CEO of Cruise. Quote, we are excited to partner with Uber to bring the benefits of safe, reliable, autonomous driving to even more people, unlocking a new era of urban mobility. So the questions arise, safer. Okay, well, it's one of the words that they use, and that's an aspiration. Okay, so we'll give them that. But the question is, how are they going to do it? And I guess you would say probably by deploying safe vehicles. So my question is, where will they get them? There's no federal or state definition of safety. And when they talk about risk, it has two parameters, consequence and likelihood. Any AV failure consequences are high because you've got a car and you've got passengers and people, all that. So really the only question is, what is the likelihood of occurrence? With a joint effort by Uber and Cruise, you've got to ask if it's as frequent as Uber sexual assaults, there's going to be a big problem. So what does safety mean? Well, per ISO, International Standards Organization 26262, quote, it's the absence of unreasonable risk, quote. So if that's the definition you're using, you've got to ask who determined what is acceptable and who has published the Uber Cruise definition of reasonable risk so that we know what we're dealing with. We'd like to know the limits. If you go with another definition of safety, per Merriam-Webster, it says the condition of being safe from undergoing or causing hurt, injury, or loss. So then you've got to ask, well, what does safe mean? And per Merriam-Webster, it means it's free from harm or risk, unhurt, or secure from threat of danger, harm, or loss. Clearly, there's no objective basis for saying this. So I think the Uber Cruise announcement doesn't meet any of the commonly accepted definition of safe. They really owe their public the definition of safe and safer so that people can objectively evaluate this. And here's the gaslight illumination part. Since their use of safe is untethered to either truth, objective evaluation, or commonly accepted definition of safe, the Uber Cruise announcement affirmatively meets the Harry Frankfurter definition of bullshit, and therefore is my candidate for Gaslight of the Week.
So, Brad, I'm flattered that you choose my constant nominee of GM Cruise.
Well,
But you know,
it has Uber. It slipped over, so I'm not infringing on your territory.
I don't know. I mean, I mean, Michael, what do you think? Do you think he's stealing my thunder?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I was worried about that, but you seem like you're handling it pretty well.
Well, you know, externally I can hide my emotions. Internally, it's rage. Now, but that is the excellent question of this is just marketing nonsense. I think we can all agree on that, right?
Well, sure, but well, what is the developer's responsibility to define the safety limits they're imposing on the public to the public that's supposed to be consuming their goods or services?
Right.
What is their responsibility, and what are the consequences of their not publishing their objective limits or even their aspirational limits?
Do these companies have that internally inside their hardware and software development process? Do they have guidelines of this is safety? I mean, when I worked at large software companies, we had definitions of we have to meet X, Y, and Z. If you're outside of these parameters, this lovely man named Steve Jobs will meet you in an elevator and scream at you. I mean, you have to do this. I get the sense that these AV companies are just like, hey, let's let's imagine the Jetsons and not have anything behind it. Or am I just being naive or cynical?
I think the standard that Fred mentioned, 26262, is a good start, but it's nowhere near enough. Um, and these are all good examples, Anthony. When you said, what do we mean the legal system has to develop? All of this is in some ways part of the legal management of risk. Um, I think it's also worth noting, and I'm sure others will note this, that we're talking about Uber and we're talking about
Cruise.
and both companies have had terrible situations that made them stop and supposedly divorce themselves from this stuff, and now they're back at it again. So their track record on this is not great. But also, we got to bear in mind that what they're doing is they're going to put these cars in very narrow ring fencing environments and travel at very slow speeds. That doesn't make them safer, but it's less likely to cause a horrendous problem. Although there have been instances where cars have drugged people down the road at very slow speeds. Still not a very safe situation. But I do. I think they'll continue to work at this because there's just too much money in this to develop a fleet that picks you up and takes you somewhere. And using buses in an urban environment, which is what we're talking about, even if they're minivans, and drops you off at a destination, is similar to somewhat between a taxi and a bus. But do I think they're going to be able to establish what safe is to everybody's satisfaction? No, because safe right now is not, for all the reasons that Fred talked about. It's hard to quantify. And so you see some of the positions taken by Senators Markey and Blumenthal that these vehicles have to be as safe as a human being. It's really hard to quantify what that means. So
Right, and whether it's a drunk human being or a sober human being, or hey, I don't know if you saw this announcement, Mike, but Waymo has now been approved to offer its services on the interstate highways in San Francisco. So where before they were restricted to geofenced and slow maneuvers and slow traffic, they're now basically given carte blanche to zoom down the highway. So I'm very concerned about that.
I am too, Fred. I think I'm not. It wasn't clear from what I read about it whether there was a safety driver in the vehicle, but even Uber's safety drivers didn't manage the risk well because they were lulled into a false sense of security, and they were after miles, not necessarily safe miles. So we've seen that movie before, but and then if it's not a safety driver in the vehicle, we're talking about a safety driver off-site. I can't imagine that's as good as. I'm sure there's some rationale that it is, but it's not. There's too much going on. Other cars with drivers waving, saying, "Let me into the lane." Like I want to see the machine that does that, even on a highway. I spent a lot of time in New York City, and if you walk the streets of New York City, at any intersection, you have food delivery guys on e-bikes on the sidewalk in the wrong direction. You have jaywalkers, like people pushing food cart trailers out in the middle of traffic. Tell me there's going to be a vehicle that can manage all that. Maybe someday, not in my lifetime.
All right. I saw a traffic sign just the other day. It said speed limit 25 in the school zone when children are present. So I thought, how in the world is a computer driven vehicle going to process that instruction, number one, or even recognize it? Number two, how is it going to look around and say, oh, this is a fire hydrant. That's not a child. This is just an enormous task to do things that are very routine for human beings. I've got very little hope. I don't, well, I'm kind of old, but I don't intend to see any of this happen before while I'm alive.
Well, as a lawyer, you would hear people say, "Well, I swerve to avoid a squirrel." Well, that's not an excuse. A squirrel. Are you supposed to swerve to avoid the moose? Yeah. So where's the shades of gray? How big is the animal that you're supposed to plow through or plow over versus the one you're not supposed to hit? There's a lot of those questions. We're not even talking about a vehicle now. We're talking about a wild animal. And
where's the food delivery driver? Is he bringing me my food? I mean,
right.
I want that guy alive. The other one, I didn't order Indian food tonight. Take him out.
And how do you discriminate a moose from somebody at Comic-Con?
Hi-oh. The more concerning thing about Waymo, I don't necessarily think they have safety drivers on the freeway, is that anytime I see a Jaguar moving at highway speeds, I want to get away from it.
Yeah, my understanding is they do not have safety drivers. They're going full autonomous on the freeways in San Francisco.
Right.
Yeah, I think they were going to have safety drivers for a limited period of time before moving into no safety driver territory.
Well, yeah, they posted one of the product people at Waymo posted saying, hey, on LinkedIn, saying, hey, we're opening this up to just the Waymo employees first. We're going to go free.
Yeah.
And in the comments thread, if you're on LinkedIn, you see this. There's a guy named Fred Perkins who's like, did you guys get permission from everybody else who you're all putting in part of this test?
Great point, Fred. Yeah.
Who would say something like that on LinkedIn?
It was you.
Oh, okay.
Somebody changing a tire on the side of the road didn't get permission.
Right. So you're both members of the SAE, and this is going to be my naive question of the week. So all of these cars are recording data. So they all have some version of an event data recorder, the car version of a little black box, we'll say. Is there any chance that that data will be required to be stored in a standardized format?
It is in a standardized format now.
Oh, it is. So like every manufacturer uses the exact same things?
No.
So that's what I mean.
No, there are manufacturers that exceed the minimum aspects of it. This is all subject of 563, which is the federal standards. So they have to account. It's very similar to what they do with, they don't tell you how to build a safe windshield. They just tell you what the parameters of safety means. So the recorder must do this. So it has to record at 5 seconds.
Right.
Some manufacturers are doing more. Some manufacturers are recording some automation. But there are some minimum standards to this. But the EDR device is an antiquated device. It was never built for this. And if there really is, if you boil it right down to what's required, there's probably 15 signals because there's some redundancy in there. And it's recorded at 0.2 of a second at its closest interval. Tesla, by comparison, the data is being recorded at 1/1000th of a second.
Milliseconds. Yeah.
My saying about this is a lot happens in a second sequentially to tell the story. So you got 5 seconds of data. It's only recorded in the event of an event, and it's looking backwards, and it covers a very narrow set of circumstance. It was supposed to be about really airbag safety, and automatic emergency braking and distronic DSC controls. When that's the committee I sit on, and it's mostly populated by OEMs, and they start talking about, oh, you know how expensive it is to expand this thing, and 5 seconds is enough, and so you can look at what this data logger concept is, which is it's going to capture video if it's available. It's going to capture what automation was in use. This is something I think you guys might find interesting because it's an offshoot of what we're talking about there. Several states have created state-based EDR laws, not just the federal ones. And I would say half of those states that have state-based EDR laws, they describe an EDR, what we would think of as 563, that little disc, that little device in the car. But they also describe it as if the vehicle's capable of transmitting data from the car to a cloud. That's an EDR.
Okay.
We have federal law saying EDR data belongs to the consumer. So if you wrap those two together, you get a very expansive view of what an EDR device is, and by virtue of that, who's entitled to get that. So, I mean, the OEMs, when I brought this to their attention in this committee, we were like, really? We got that? Like, yeah. So there is state law that also has to be evaluated as we look at these kinds of things about like EDR, what's current status right now.
Okay. So there's no larger standard moving forward to capture all of the data that's available now. I'm thinking of an analogy of in the music world, there's something called the MIDI standard. It was designed like in the late 70s, and it lasted it's up till today, and it's a very kind of open standard. Every manufacturer that uses this uses the exact same thing. They haven't changed it. They've made an update to it now, but they haven't changed it forever. It's incredibly robust and allows a lot of data capture. I'm seeing something like this for auto manufacturers where we know what data is available now. We know what could be added in the future and will last us decades. Is there any movement towards that, or the OEMs are kind of like, let's just do this stuff proprietary for our own purposes?
So it's funny you mentioned that. I think my next mission will be to develop with the appropriate community, developing a set of data that's accessible to understand what happened in the event of an event. Some of the tension on that, though, is what do you do with data privacy? And who has rights to do this? Who has rights to get that data? Not just, create it and disperse it. So this is some of the law stuff, Anthony, that I think we really need to work on as a society. And I think we have to start working on it now. Think about this way. If you're driving a vehicle and the vehicle's recording your speed, does that mean nobody else can access what your speed was at the time of the accident? Don't you have some societal obligations to disclose what your speed was? And so that's a bit of a hairy Gordian knot that you get into. How do you balance some of these divergent interests? People can see what you're doing in the data versus I have some privacy concerns about people seeing where I'm going at any one time. What about the cockpit cameras that are managing, human responsiveness to certain environments? So we were just working on a case a couple of days ago where this person alleged that they were struck by a vehicle that was making a left-hand turn in front of them. It was a secondary road, so 2 lanes in each direction, shopping districts on both sides. This gentleman took off. It happened to be in a Tesla, but the Tesla didn't do anything wrong here. So this gentleman at a red light leaves the red light at full acceleration, and within 9 seconds was up to 104 miles an hour. And this vehicle that was attempting to make a left-hand turn stopped, didn't hit him, and he then went off-road and took out a telephone pole. He was alleging that he had been struck by this person making a left. It didn't. It's clearly shown in the video. But nobody had actually understood how fast he was going. And there's no way you can drive 104 miles an hour in that environment from a sudden stop and be safe, not negligent, whatever. And so it does show you there's this space we have to make a society to say, what the heck went on? And don't we have access, even if that person doesn't want to give it up, to take that information, understand what took place, and that level of transparency, I think, is owed to the public, so they can evaluate legal issues and whether the equipment's right and who's right or who's wrong. And I do applaud the NTSB after the Mountain View analysis said, we have to have greater transparency. They don't really talk about who has rights to the investigative data, but they say people investigating these accidents need to have the access to it.
We're here to help, Mike, but that depends upon our listeners doing what, Anthony?
Going to autosafety.org and clicking the donate button. Click it once, click it twice. Just click it once and then put in your credit card information. Clicking it more than once, you're just reloading the page. It's just weird. Why would you do that? Michael Brooks, I have a question for you, maybe the other Mike will have this answer. So what you were just talking about there in terms of privacy and whatnot, I thought as a legal concept is once you're out in public, you're seen by other people, your expectations of privacy are nil. Like I can't be, if I'm driving a car.
That would be my argument. And that's always my argument, particularly if you're violating the law or the speed limit in this guy's case. But yes, you don't have an expectation to privacy if you're traveling on a public road would be my argument there.
That's what I thought. I agree, Counselor. Objections, Fred?
None here.
Perfect. Great. Case dismissed.
Well, I think there's a social compact here too. Like if you're using these roadways and you're potentially exposing other people, not just other cars, but pedestrians, you've made almost like a DUI concept. If you're operating this vehicle and the police have good grounds to suspect you're inebriated, if you refuse a breathalyzer test or some sort of other test to evaluate whether you're sober or not, you lose your license if you refuse, because there's a certain element of this that is for the good of society as opposed to for the safeness of society, as opposed to your individual rights. So, but again, we're talking about, Anthony, I could go on all day about the way the legal system has to evolve around these issues. These are very difficult issues, but it gets back to my bigger point, which is we better start working on it now. And I do think getting to data standards that should be subject to interrogation in the event of an event is where we have to go. Now, draw that line for me, and I'll have 10 different people disagree that the line's in the right spot.
Fair enough. I think we've taken up enough of our listeners' time at this point. Does anyone have anything to add before we wrap up?
Only that we've had some discussions about duty of care, which perhaps you've heard on our podcast, Mike, but it seems to bear on this issue as well.
Well, we're going to have you come back and talk some more. How's that sound?
Yeah.
That's great. All right. Well, thank you, Mike Nelson of QuantivRisk for coming to join us today and giving us a whole bunch of questions for the next hour we bring you on. So thanks, listeners. Till next week. Next week, we'll have more Gaslight. If Fred chooses GM Cruise again, I'm driving up to Massachusetts and having a discussion with him. And we'll have recalls. Oh, we missed a bunch of recalls this week and all sorts of fun stuff from the news. Till next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yes.
Bye, everybody.
For more information, visit www.autosafety.org.